Okay, so this is take two. Welcome back from the break, and thank you for your patience as we obviously continue to make sure our technology is working properly for you. You should be seeing on the screen right now the results of the Just City poll that we took during our first session, asking participants what values they thought were most important in their home city right now. And you can see right now fairness and engagement, acceptance and mobility are really strong values that cities across the board are feeling are important to them. Thank you, Kat, for sharing that. That can be closed down. We can move into our second panel, which is titled Restorative Justice Through a Dignity Economy. And so I'm really excited to be reunited with the other half of our Mayoral Fellowship cohort, Mayor Woodfin, Lumumba, and Patterson-Howard, who have taken time out of their schedules to join us this afternoon. And I want to make a special point of acknowledging how honored we are to have them here, because they each have been dealing with, in real time, as I'm sure you've all been reading and watching, some additional crises that are affecting their cities, whether it's the health pandemic, the water crisis, police, or finance. These public servants, as someone remarked in the earlier panel, are really working 24/7 to better our city. So let me just first thank you again for being with us, and really excited to have you back at this GSD even virtually. Let me introduce these guys just a little bit again. We've included their bios for you in the chat, but we are joined by Mayor Randall Woodfin of Birmingham, Alabama, who's the 30th mayor of Birmingham, who's been focusing his efforts on many things, but he's got 99 neighborhoods in his city that he's working to address justice and equity for. We also have Mayor Chokwe Lumumba, who is the 53rd mayor of the city of Jackson. And there were lots of plugs for Jackson State earlier this afternoon, Mayor, as well as a number of prayers going out to you and your constituents coming out of the water crisis. Mayor Lumumba is the youngest mayor who was professor. And we're also joined by new Mayor Shawyn Patterson-Howard. This is her first term as an elected official, and she is the first mayor of my neighbor, Mount Vernon, New York. So welcome to you all this afternoon. We're going to start this conversation around economic development, redevelopment, urban renewal, and pathways forward for your cities. I'd like to start with Mayor Woodfin, if I could, because your neighborhood that you chose to focus on during the fellowship, Inslee, another historic Black neighborhood, kind of dovetails into the conversation we were having earlier around preservation Black narratives. And there's new economic development opportunities happening around Inslee and that are encroaching upon Inslee. For redevelopment, you talked about a historic property, the Ramsey McCormick building. But we know that reinvesting in just real estate in and of itself is not enough to move the needle on creating greater equity and inclusion and justice for Black folks in our more marginalized populations in our communities. So my first question to you is, what are some of the people and place-based strategies you wish to create for greater economic equity, inclusion, and ownership for the residents of Inslee?
Toni, thank you for that question, and equally thank you for allowing me to be a part of MICD. You know, there are two things that I want to stress before I answer this question. One is it's been a long time since I've been a student, so this has been refreshing to be a fellow. One, learning from my other cohorts, mayors who are doing the work. But two, literally having to be in a position to study and learn and prep and then present back to the same cohort of fellows some of my assignments and what I've had to do. So it's good. It's been a great feeling to be a student again, if that makes any sense. I will tell everybody I'm in a position of mayor, there's so much to do at one time. Having a sense of urgency around doing all of those things keeps me up at night, but refreshing in the morning, ready to tackle another issue. Related to your question, it is a big issue. What are we as a city and an administration doing to support place and person around inclusive growth, et cetera? I think the biggest thing is I always speak to our citizens where they live, the neighborhood they live in, the street they live on, the block they live on. And I'm going to frame my answer by giving a story. And that is for the average neighborhood in the city of Birmingham, a city made up of 99 neighborhoods. There is a mother or grandmother who has a child or grandchild who lives with her. And when she walks out into her front porch, if she looks to her right, likely there is a dilapidated structure, home that's been there for years. To her left, there's probably an overgrown lot that hasn't been cut in quite some time. And if her child or grandchild wants to ride their bike on the sidewalk, it's not even and it hasn't been walkable or bikeable in quite some time. And when she pulls out of her driveway to go to the store or church or to wherever she's going, she's dodging potholes because the street probably likely hasn't been paved in years. In addition to that, that same child or grandchild that she has living with her, the neighborhood park maybe doesn't have adequate playground equipment for her child or grandchild to play in. And they have to rush home before it gets dark because the street light doesn't work. And then when she finally gets home and it's time to eat, she's reminded that they don't live in proximity of healthy food. And from time to time, at night, they have to drop to the floor because they hear gunshots. That frame is one we've been attempting to address, tackle, and solve for over the last 3 years that I've been mayor. Now, so ideally, what does that look like now, moving forward? Well, when she walks out of her home, what we've done is not just remove that blighted structure to her right, but we've moved a dilapidated structure, at least one a day, to well over 1,100 of them in 3 years. To the right of her, we've not only cut that lot, but we've invested more money into our land bank to go vertical with single family homes so that same child or grandchild can have somebody to play with as a next door neighbor. That sidewalk, we've made the necessary investments in, and so that same child or grandchild can not only be is the sidewalk walkable, but they can actually ride their bicycle safely on that sidewalk. The same for that street that mother or grandmother backs out on. We've invested over $28 million in the last 3 years in paving streets across the city, as well as investing in our neighborhood parks so that child or grandchild can use the swing or play on the basketball court or whatever that is in that neighborhood park. In addition to that, we partner with Alabama Power to make more LED lights across our city so our citizens feel safe. And we created a healthy food fund to make sure we do everything we can to lure healthy grocery options to our citizens, as well as put every tool in the toolbox around prevention, enforcement, and reentry to address crime so our citizens feel safe where they live. All of that is centered around place. And when we talk about the neighborhood revitalization efforts, I am 100% in support of economic development, supporting our small business owners, investing in our entrepreneurs and those who take risks, and creating funds that support the work to create and generate wealth in our community. But people have to appreciate where they live, and we want property values to appreciate too. That being the case, it's not just about place. It is also about where providing opportunity for our youngest generation. So when we talk about growth, our young people need to know that if they want to go to college, that when they finish high school in Birmingham, money's not a barrier, and they can go to college tuition free through the Birmingham Promise. In addition to that, when we talk about an inclusive economy and creating growth, our young people 16 and 17 years of age can work 18 hours a week, leave high school early, receive credit hours, and also make a minimum of $15, which is a livable wage, because they shouldn't have to wait till they're an adult to understand what it means to gain work experience, as well as make a livable wage at the same time. And so these are just some of the ways when we talk about an inclusive economy and equity, making sure our citizens have food options, making sure they feel safe where they live, making sure they have the opportunity for their property value to increase, and making sure we make the continued investments in our younger generation to be college educated as well as be gainfully employed. And the last thing around place, again, economic development opportunities. There are enough entrepreneurs in this city, a city that's 74% black, the fourth blackest city in America. My friend Mayor Lumumba is on here, and he'll tell you is black Birmingham related to its population. But both of us are equally concerned about making sure um, black men as well as women, black women have opportunities to be successful on their entrepreneurial journey. And the city of Birmingham has a role to play around how we allocate our resources to support their work so we can create more equity related to not just how taxes are allocated, but more so in the promise of the future for these entrepreneurs.
Thank you so much. It's such a comprehensive approach that your city and you in particular are taking with your team to think about these issues. And I think you did a great job of helping us understand that just investing in real estate is not enough, that you as the mayor really need to figure out how you're stacking these different investments and then concentrating them in specific places in order to make it more a ripple effect difference on the lives of people as well as place. And I'm going to want to come back to where you ended, which is around this empowerment through entrepreneurship. And I'm going to expand that to be really about different forms of ownership. And I'm hoping all three of us can talk about that. I think the other thing that your remarks speak to perhaps is, at least as a question for me, is the importance of planning. How much planning did you do that was both near-term, mid-term, or long-term that allowed you and your team to arrive at the series of strategies, investments that you needed for Inslee and perhaps other parts of the city? And so this brings us to Mayor Patterson-Howard. So we're going to come back to that. But I'm going to bring Mayor Patterson-Howard in because as a part of her project, as a part of the fellowship, she brought to our attention, she inherited coming in as mayor of Mount Vernon, speaking to this inconsistency of public policy around revitalization that's created, uncertainty and even disillusionment around the effectiveness of government, stalled reinvestment, and perhaps even, the proposition of planning. And so you believe now is actually the time to dust off the city's comprehensive plan, which, like many cities, they haven't dusted off in many decades. And you believe this could be a centering tool. So I'd love for you to elaborate on how you think a comprehensive plan process, as well as the outcome of the comprehensive plan, can help to restore trust among city residents, stakeholders, and investors, and help to advance critical improvements.
So thank you so much, Toni. I'm not sure if you could hear me, but thank you so much. I really appreciate the opportunity to participate in the MICD Fellowship. It has been an incredible learning experience. Coming into mayoral office in January of 2020 and then being met by COVID within 60 days, the epicenter of the virus really started about 2 miles away from me in New Rochelle. And so everything that we kind of had planned was derailed. But as we really still had to focus on the challenges of our community, one of the things that I ran on was the comprehensive plan. Mount Vernon has been a tale of two cities. While we were founded in 1644 as a bedroom community by 1,000 families that moved from New York City out here to the suburbs, which is just right outside of the Bronx, Mount Vernon has been from its inception a planned community. They cut up the entire community into parcels, and it was really about creating an atmosphere for working families. Unfortunately, a few hundred years later in the early 1900s, not for the benefit of Mount Vernon residents, we had a railroad divide our city in two so that richer people from Connecticut could make it to New York City to work. Now, that railroad cut of over 1.1 miles created a natural red line in our community, splitting our community into North and South Side. And as we heard from Mr. Perry, the divestment and the misinvestment that happened on the south side of the railroad cut really has defined our community since then. And so, as we talked about, everyone says that the ice is not as cold on the south side. So there's been a devaluation in our homes and in our communities on the south side of Mount Vernon. There has not been much investment, and at times there's been misinvestment. So yes, we have been marred over the past 20 years by inconsistencies, by uncertainty, by disparate investment. A lot of people have been concerned about backdoor dealing, who you know, lack of investment in commercial corridors, creation of food deserts and neighborhoods on the south side of our railroad, which have become increasingly blighted. So one of the challenges that we're dealing with is the last time that we had a comprehensive plan was 1968. Now, 1968 was a good year, but it was 52 years ago. How do I know? It's when I was born. And I think that I've changed since 1968. And I would say that Mount Vernon has changed. And it's really interesting. I've been diving into our 1968 comprehensive plan. And one of the things that it spoke to is the lack of investment south of the railroad cut and what we needed to do. After World War II, they built Leicester Towers, which became housing for 500 families, really focusing on World War II vets. They didn't get the GI Bill, which brought them homes. They got moved into public housing. And what our comprehensive plan told us not to do back then was to make that neighborhood be more impacted by building more low-income housing. They said more low-income housing needed to be built, but it needed to be spread throughout our community on both sides of the railroad in well-established neighborhoods. But what happened here in Mount Vernon is the very opposite of what the comprehensive plan said. We built 2 more public housing projects right around the only public housing project in the community, one for 250 families, another one for about 160 families, causing more impaction of poverty in that neighborhood. But what we didn't do, we didn't put supermarkets, we didn't put parks, we didn't put schools in that neighborhood, we didn't put medical facilities in those neighborhoods, and we pulled out all of the services. We stopped paving roads. The neighborhood became more and more symbolized by scaffolding as opposed to new buildings. And then in the 80s and the 90s, what we continue to do even more is build a lot of our senior housing, affordable senior housing in those neighborhoods. And so it's not just been divestment, but oftentimes misinvestment. And so, you know, when a community sees that on the other side of the railroad tracks, parks are being invested in, neighborhoods, paving is happening, schools are being upgraded and expanded, resources for education are being more invested in the north side of the railroad tracks, then you see educational attainment looks very different on one side of the community. Job opportunities and economic mobility looks very different. And we literally have 2 cities within one city. It's not just about the neighborhood. Mount Vernon is oftentimes referred to as Mount Vernon and Fleetwood. Now, we don't have a Fleetwood Police Department, nor do we have a Fleetwood Fire Department or Fleetwood City Council members, but we almost refer to our community as 2 different communities. And people say, well, where do you live? I live in Fleetwood. They say, is that Mount Vernon? No, it's Fleetwood. And so that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. So with comprehensive planning, we need to do a new comprehensive plan. And this time we have to listen to it. And so the importance of comprehensive planning and how it will restore trust in our community is that there'll be inclusion. We have to include our community, not just those who have, but those who don't have, not just those who are connected and engaged and feel represented, but those who feel disenfranchised and who are very disillusioned with how our community is developing or not developing. We have to have equitable economic development. It's not just about affordable housing, but workforce housing. When you have a community whose general average income is about $60,000, we can't just build housing for those who make over $100,000 and above, but we want to make sure that we're retaining our working class. We want to make sure that we're even providing opportunities for our young professionals, not to only purchase homes, but if they want to live in apartments, that we're building good housing complexes and apartment complexes with nice amenities. And that when we're building new housing, that the housing is not just for the wealthy or for the poor, but we're building mixed income housing. We don't need to have segregated neighborhoods, those where you have high income earners and low income earners. But if we have mixed income apartments and mixed income neighborhoods and businesses in those communities, it's really important. We have to make sure that everyone has a seat at the table. And we really have to focus on restorative justice, whether or not the railroad cut was the intended consequence of the railroad cut was divestment in the South Side. It's something that happened, and we have to be unapologetic about having that conversation. We have to make sure that the vision for Mount Vernon going forward is inclusive of everyone. We want to make sure that it retains the residents who have had the grit and resilience to stand by our side as we've struggled, but also provides opportunities for new families who want to move in, who can invest in our community. We want to make sure that we're balancing the competing interests of those who have NIMBY and those who are looking for opportunity. We want to make sure that we're protecting our public investments, our parks, our infrastructure, and that that's happening throughout the city. But we also want to make sure that we are having a very rigorous dialogue, because that is something that has not happened. Our community has been mired by political tribalism, political dysfunction, and a lot of infighting. And it's really, for so many people, they're just disillusioned, disconnected, and they feel that if you don't know the right people, then you can't get the right services. And so our administration is really, really focused on restorative justice and ensuring that we are bringing people in, that we're focusing on quality of life, code enforcement and housing, a Love My City campaign where we're really getting people to love not just their hood, but their neighborhood. We also want to make sure that we're providing a dignity economy, that we're investing and we're expanding the capacity of all of our residents, that we're supporting entrepreneurs and small businesses, that we are providing for our families who are on the brink of, sometimes, especially through COVID, we've seen so many are living on the brink of homelessness. And we call people essential workers and we celebrated them, but are we doing anything to elevate them? Are we providing opportunities for economic mobility? So we're looking, and we're a partner in Mayors for Guaranteed Income, where we're going to be giving families $500 a month for the next 12 to 18 months. Now, while that won't make them rich, it will take some of the stress and the strain off of them. We're doing a lot. We're focused on economic empowerment, economic mobility, home ownership, skilling up our community, and ensuring that our schools are preparing our young people for not only the world of work, but the world of owning business and having choices. Because when people have choices, when they have options, that gives them power. And we want to make sure that we are harnessing the collective strength and resources of everyone in our community to make a difference going forward. We are Mount Vernon strong. We are Mount Vernon proud, and we are resilient. And as I've said, people have counted us out for a long time, but we are prepared and we are ready to take our place as the jewel of Westchester in a way that is unapologetic. So we're excited, and this work that we're doing through MICD is making a huge difference and is reshaping our vision, our focus, and the way that we will move forward. So thank you for your resources, and thank you to all of those who are in this cohort, because I'm learning from each of you.
Thank you so much, Mayor Patterson-Howard. And I'm going to want to come back to, as I said earlier, the role of planning and how we're using that as a tool. And your example was interesting for a couple of reasons. One, that in 1968 there was a thoughtful response to how to address issues of affordable housing, and that place in your city in particular, which was ignored. Which we can have this conversation about the efficacy of plans, right? Which I would argue some people are very dismissive of because they don't think they have any efficacy, and some of us who do. So maybe we'll want to kind of talk about the teeth that these kind of regulatory plans have, and is that the right approach to go? But also just to sort of talk about, there can certainly be, economies changing, and so there's this gradual disinvestment in neighborhoods that happens because of economic shifts. But in your case, you're also talking about kind of sanctioned disinvestment that happened in Mount Vernon through this intentional exclusionary policy and harmful policy, right, which ignored the 68 plan and situated all those people concentrated in an area where you shouldn't be building housing, perhaps, because it was formerly industrial, but then without any services. And so I think this brings us really nicely to Mayor Lumumba, who actually introduced to us in the fellowship this notion of the dignity economy, which I, like you, were very struck by the introduction of that values-based language as a proposition for economic development. And so, Mayor Lumumba, we've all been watching for the last several weeks you kind of go through the proverbial fire on top of the year-long fire we've all been under with the pandemic and civil unrest. That's just on top of what has probably been some long-standing sort of issues of quality of housing, clearly quality of your civic infrastructures and utility infrastructures that are stripping many residents not only of their basic needs, but as you describe it, their dignity. To the extent that we intentionally create these places that do not include our basic needs is in and of itself unjust, and doesn't enable our participants to fully participate in their own prosperity. And these measures of ownership that I'm just going to call you Dr. Woodfin. Mayor Woodfin talked about. So my question for you is, you suggested that we have to begin to measure our economic progress centered on what you call the digital economy. So I'd love for you to walk us through what you believe are the essential ingredients of this and how it's beginning to unfold in Jackson. But specifically, you talked to us about the Washington Addition neighborhood, which surrounds Jackson State University.
Well, first and foremost, I'd like to express my gratitude, not only for being a part of this panel discussion, but for being allowed the opportunity to participate in the MICD. It was not only an enjoyable experience, it was an informative experience. And just as I was able to offer this notion of the dignity economy, I also took so much away from the experience. Just the whole notion that city design does not happen by mistake. And it has intended consequences. And there are issues of equity and justice in those decisions that we make. I think that, we have to come to the place where we really reevaluate what are our metrics of success. Before I get into the notion of a dignity economy, I really like to speak to the fact of paint the picture of how circumstances exist in the city of Jackson and the state of Mississippi, for that matter. I tell people when they ask, what are my feelings on some national news, who's selected into national office, and where the economy is. I say that, quite honestly, when we're told that the nation is experiencing economic prosperity, or if we're told that the nation is experiencing, somewhat of a recession, I tell them that we don't feel it in Mississippi because we're always at the bottom. So we don't feel the big boom or the bust because we're always in the place where we are the last state. And so, I believe that we have to reevaluate our metrics of success in terms of what is a prosperous nation and what our goals should be. And I feel that the problem with economists is that economists don't study people. And so as we evaluate the success and failure of economies, it should be less based on the notion of GDP, less based on the notion of how successful the stock market might be, and more centered on the issues of sustainable development. The city of Jackson is like far too many communities, many of which are communities that my cohort, the members of my cohort can relate to, is that we are marred in cycles of humiliation, where we see poor performing schools, high poverty, high crime, failing infrastructure, and less than the centered economic development that truly benefits community. And so we need to be able to lift up this notion of a dignity economy, an economy which focuses on the inherent dignity of every single resident, so that we can begin to focus on sustainable development goals, whether or not people have access to fresh fruit and vegetables, whether or not people have infrastructure which is dependable and just and equitable in its distribution and usage, whether or not there is ability to have economic mobility. These are the metrics of success that we have to better evaluate. Furthermore, I think that we have to lift up the notion of how we create self-determined communities. As we talk about city design, Mayor Patterson-Howard, I thought that we had it bad because we haven't done a comprehensive plan since 2001. That is a memorable year for me as well, because that's the year I graduated high school. And so a lot has changed for me since that point in time. But as we open up and avail this process, what we fundamentally disagree with is the notion of designing and defending, that we should design the future of our city, that we should design projects or programs in our city and defend the meritocracy of it to our community. We must make certain that we involve community from the very onset. And community participation is not 3 minutes on a microphone during city council. And so we have opened up the process of how we engage and learn from community by having quarterly people's assemblies that we meet with community and discuss the issues that are front and center in our community, not only as an opportunity to exchange information with them, but as an opportunity to learn from them and make certain that they hold us accountable. We must turn on its head this whole notion that, people are elected into office because they present to us all of their ambition and all of their goals and aspirations, that this must be generated from the community, and the community must be able to draft its own agenda and then select the leadership which operates in accord of the community's agenda. And so we've opened up processes like participatory budgeting, where we've literally created monopoly games so the community could understand how city dollars work. Because one of the fundamental purpose or one of the fundamental responsibilities we have within our elected office is the management of our budgets. Our budgets are moral documents which reflect the moral compass of what we value. And so if we don't invite community into that process, it speaks to how little we respect the ideas and the concepts that the community lifts up. As we talk about the notion of self-determination, we understand that as we begin to build and create economic opportunity within our city, it is important that we have businesses that are generated. It is important that we are a business-friendly community, but it is also important that there is a reciprocal relationship between those businesses that profit in our community and make sure that they reinvest here in the city of Jackson. So we've lifted up the notion that we've borrowed from our history of freedom fighters like Fannie Lou Hamer in Mississippi, who found ways to organize poor farmers in the Mississippi Delta. And we're looking at creating and incubating cooperative business in our city so that we begin to fill our voids. And it becomes dangerous to redline. It becomes dangerous not to invest in our city because we know that we have a population that is necessary to support the economic development of our state, more than just our city. And so we're trying to broaden our perspective of how we fight for this dignity economy, not only in terms of the policy that we employ, but in terms of how we make a bridge between the things that people suffer from, these issues when we have been lifting up and talking about the issue of water and the insecurity, the instability and lack of availability of water in our community after in the wake of the winter weather that we have experienced. You know, we've been able in real time to lift up this issue of justice, this issue of dignity. You know, the question has been raised as water began to be restored in homes. How is it that the white communities in the city of Jackson were able to receive water before the impoverished and predominantly Black communities were able to receive it? And some people have asked, well, you know, how is that and is that problematic? And it is absolutely problematic. The problem is that it is not as simple as the notion of flipping a switch for water to be restored in one community or the next. The problem is that our community was taken advantage of long ago, long before they were invited to the table to be a part of the discussion, long before they imagined that someone like me might hold this office, right? In at a time where city was planned and designed and property value was established, and the property that was held in the highest esteem and valued at the highest price was the property that was closest to the resources that community needs. And so those communities that receive water the soonest, though more affluent communities, do so because they are closest to the water. They are closest to the water treatment facility, and therefore their water is restored early on. And so I think that we have to expand the notion of what is success and what is failure as we look locally, statewide, and nationally in terms of economies and how we apply and provide justice accordingly.
Thank you. I'm off camera, but I'm violently shaking my head in agreement and find it interesting that we are still in moments where people can pose the question of whether or not there's a problem with the inequitable distribution of resources for people, one, in the deepest need, and two, who have historically been dislocated from that, which does kind of bring us back to this role of planning, which has this tool in the comprehensive plan in particular, which has as its responsibility the distribution of resources, right? Lots of people think, you know, comprehensive plans are going to be the thing that seed development. The plan itself is not seeding the development. The plan is, and I love how you said this, like Mayor Lumumba, you talked about the budget as being a moral document and a moral contract. The plan is too. It is, and Mayor Howard said this, it is the documentation of your values and aspirations for your citizenry and the places in your city, that the budget then becomes the secondary moral document for you to execute. And so, Mayor Woodfin, you started off with this very robust and comprehensive approach of strategies that you've put in place. And I'm wondering if planning played a role in helping you to determine how and where those resources would be used. And while we're going into the Q&A period, I do want to encourage our audience to populate questions in the chat. I will begin to fold those in as we spend the next 20 minutes or so in conversation with the mayors. Mayor Woodfin.
Planning. Well, first of all, yes, planning played a role. But first of all, shout out to my two colleagues for dropping knowledge once again. I can always count on Mayor Lumumba to preach, right? Like he's going to drop it, he's going to give it to us, and we better accept it and embrace it. But for real, you all can see why this program has been so rewarding. But yes, planning played a big role in what we've executed on. I spent the first year building a team, but I spent the first 100 days, the combination of a strategic plan and listening to citizens across the city. It wasn't enough just to listen as a candidate running for office, but when I became mayor, it was important to continue to listen. And in listening, we did a joint thing. We had a strategic plan at a high level, but we spent time on the ground eyeballing what we were seeing that wasn't working for our citizens. And so having a strategic plan in place that speaks to all of these things we want to do on behalf of citizens not only allowed us to execute in a methodical way, but as both mayors have said, to measure what we've been able to do on a daily, weekly, monthly basis and track that information, and then literally spit it back out to our citizens. And so just this year, for example, we are a year into the coronavirus, and a lot of sharing information and engaging our citizens and constituents for all of us as mayors has moved to online, teletown halls, period. And so for us, this information we're still collecting from a strategic standpoint, we're able to share that information with the joint mayor and individual city council counselor in their district weekly about, hey, here's what's going on. Here's what we inherited in your district around the disinvestments and the not having the economic development opportunities, et cetera. And here's what we've been able to accomplish. So many of you all know my project was around the McCormick building, but the McCormick building in Inslee was not in isolation for issues in the city of disinvestment. There were many other McCormick style big commercial buildings that were dilapidated and abandoned 20, 30 years. We've done at least 3 of these properties like the McCormick across the city. So it's good to see us be very intentional about this, but all of that comes from planning.
Yeah. I want to dovetail into that 2 things. One, in the previous panel, someone brought up the question around trust, and that if we are to move to the work that is of equity, inclusion, and dignity, particularly with government, who have a reputation in many of our cities as not being in support of addressing these issues and intentionally created them, how is that bridge built so that you can do effective planning and engagement? And I want to tie to that, and Mayor Lumumba, you were starting to describe some of your tactics. What does it look like to try to create a table of power sharing where, in fact, those who are most disadvantaged have the least amount of power to advocate on behalf of their own interest? So talk to a little bit about how you're able to build trust as a way of doing this work, and how have you been able to bring different constituents to the same table to create a recalibration of the power imbalance that exists in these communities as well? And any of you can take up an answer to that.
Excuse me. This is a really important point for me, and I'll speak to it on multiple levels. But the reality is that as we try to execute these goals, is that we have to work at the speed of trust, right? The speed of how community is engaged, how community believes, adopts, and embraces the plan in which they are a part of co-creating. I spoke to not only the People's Assembly, but we've had a series of roundtable discussions because we fundamentally believe in the notion of collective genius. We understand that, myself as mayor, my administration, while I believe that I have gifted people on our team, we're not gifted enough, smart enough, capable enough to solve the city's problems all by ourselves. And so, we've taken data such as, the fact that the state of Mississippi has the demographic that it is losing at the most significant rate are our millennials. And so we established a millennial roundtable discussion where it's called the Mayor and the Millennials. And we sit down and we talk about quality of life issues. We learn from the group and learn that they like walkable cities. We learned that they like public art, and therefore we went after the Bloomberg Public Arts Challenge and were able to secure $1 million for public art installations across the city. That we received a CERNA grant that is dedicated towards equity and justice and messages of art that speak to that. That we've talked about how we make our city more walkable and create bike lanes in our infrastructure. All of these things that we can look at how we build the future of Jackson today. I think that it is important that we embrace every opportunity to learn from community. One of the things that I have been proud of being a part of, and this actually predates my time as mayor, it was the work of my father when he was on city council, when he created the Ward 2 City Council People's Assembly. And we've taken that idea and we've expanded on it. We've expounded on it, understanding that community has to really be engaged. Community has to adopt and embrace, its plan for itself. And it has to incorporate what the community sees and what the community values most and is suffering from. And so that is difficult work. And it isn't, there aren't many shortcuts to it, right? Yeah. We have to realize that many of the people that we're speaking most profoundly about are those individuals who have been locked out of the process. Those individuals that don't really know what a comprehensive plan truly is, and don't know how it's going to affect them, and don't necessarily trust that you are sincere in your efforts to incorporate their voice. And so it's about proving and establishing that for them. One of the ways that I look at this issue, coming out of a family where my parents were both organizers and thought so much of their work and community that they felt that they needed to give their most precious resource to that, and that was their children. They raised us in this network of organizers. And as my father was attempting to run for mayor, they asked him some questions, some hardliners that said, listen, how are you going to, make this profound impact on the world by fixing potholes? And so he, quite eloquently said that that's exactly what we have to do. We have to be able to connect pothole to pothole and community to community. So people in Jackson, Mississippi, understand that there's a community that looks just like theirs in Mount Vernon, a community that looks just like theirs in Birmingham, Alabama, that is suffering from that same infrastructure problem that they are. And as we fix that pothole, what we ultimately learn is that the pothole was never your problem in the first place. Your problem is that you didn't control the decision-making process that led to a pothole being fixed. Mm-hmm. Your problem is that you haven't had much influence on what city design looks like. You haven't had much influence on what the curriculum that educates your children looks like. And so your problem is a fundamental one. Your problem is that you lack the self-determination in order to affect the quality of life you so justly deserve. And so that's why we have to invite people into the process and never design and defend. Never design a program or design a plan and defend its merit to the community, but make sure that they are engaged at the very inception of that idea.
Yeah, I want to add on to this discussion with and take piece of questions that I'm getting from the audience. In this time of COVID, and Mayor Patterson-Howard, you've only been mayor in times of COVID. How is, engagement, government accountability working in this space? Have you found useful ways, and again, this is to any of you, have you found useful ways to engage residents, address constituent concerns, practice follow through effectively, which, by the way, helps in building this sort of notion of trust that we've been talking about?
I had to unmute myself. Okay, yes, I wanted to unmute myself. So, like you said, I've pretty much only been mayor in the time of COVID, but when I was running and I was a political outsider, I created a show called Sundays with Shawyn, and it's on Facebook Live. We've put it on YouTube now and our community access, our cable access channel. And so each week we have conversations with the residents, conversations with business owners, faith leaders, just different sectors of our community to talk about the very real issues. We do updates on the potholes, updates on the vaccinations and testing. We're talking about how monies are coming into the city, things about police reform. So we're having the conversations, and it has been difficult, but at the same time, because I am an organizer and because by nature I'm a community activist and advocate and equity leader, I put on my mask, I put on my sneakers, I put on my hoodie, and I go out and I speak to people in neighborhoods. Because while COVID is still here, we still have to move about the community. And so I'm not afraid to engage residents. I always make sure that I'm safe and we're doing social distancing and we're wearing our masks, but I'm going to meet and have conversations with people where they are. We have even done Zoom conversations with neighborhood associations, faith-based leaders, business partners. And so, just like we're doing business on a virtual platform, we're continuing to reach out to the community on a virtual platform, and also have the community that is reaching out to us through constituent services, through the mayor's office. So any way that we can connect, we are connecting, and we're listening, and we're hearing, and we're responding.
Great, thank you. I'm going to try to see if I can get in maybe two more questions before we invite our respondent and Michael Murphy. I want to circle this back, as I promised, to ownership, because in all of you all's remarks, you're speaking about the importance of different types of ownership. Your sense of ownership of a process and ownership of your ability to participate, material ownership of land and property, business procurement. And so I'm wondering if maybe there is an example any or each of you might want to offer that is something you feel like is effectively moving the needle, particularly on Black ownership or Black sense of ownership. And again, that can be material or non-material ownership. Rights and power and decision making, to me, is also a form of ownership, as well as more material ones around land, property, and business. Is there something you're working on right now, that you're doing right now, or that you see working somewhere else that you think is going to be important to lessening the vulnerabilities of Black and brown folks and communities by increasing their ownership and equity participation in city building?
So for me, I really enjoyed learning from Mayor Spicer and about her Citizen Academy, where they're coming in and learning about how government works and how it operates, because that's one of the biggest challenges that we have. People will complain to the city about the schools. They're not sure who to go to about sewers. Our sewer system is operating on a defibrillator, basically. We have a pump that's keeping the sewers and 11,000 of our residents able to flush their toilets because our sewer system is collapsing. And so people don't know where to go to get information, where their voices can be heard. So we want to make sure that people are educated, and then that we are involving them. Because when you don't want people to be involved, you try and speak above them and around them and use acronyms and jargon. And we want them to understand the process, the game. We want them to have a seat at the table, and we don't want them to be pawns. Too many of our residents for far too long have been used as pawns, but under our administration, we see them as partners, and we want to make sure that their voice is valued. And so as I put together our comprehensive planning committee, our charter review committee, our capital project board, our cable advisory committee, our young professionals network, and all of the different ways that we're organizing the community, we want to make sure that stakeholders from all neighborhoods, all socioeconomic backgrounds, and different cultures are at the table, because it has to be inclusive. Like you said, you shouldn't have to defend what you plan, and you won't have to defend it if you invite them in and become a part of the process.
Thank you. Woodfin, Lumumba, an example of an ownership strategy that you're working on, that you've implemented, or that you've looked to as a part of your work?
I'll go, and I'll be very brief and short. As we remove all these blighted homes, these blighted structures that are beyond repair, what it creates is what I've called a snag-a-tooth street or a snag-a-tooth neighborhood, right? Like you got a house and then you got an empty lot, house, empty lot. That's not a good look. And so through our land bank, what I've realized is there are a lot of areas for potential growth in the city limits of Birmingham. And what I want to guard for is gentrification, where people see an area with all this potential growth, and people come in who are not necessarily investing in the area, but just want to receive a return of their investment. But in exchange for their investment, the citizen that's been living there, taking care of their home, is either boxed out or their property taxes get into a space where they're unaffordable. And so through our land bank, we want to be very, very intentional about educating our citizens on the side lot program, that one of the best ways to guard against that form of gentrification or displacement is for the existing homeowner that has an empty lot next to them. Why don't you buy this property and you are in the driver's seat to see and negotiate and control and lead what happens next to you? So that's one of the ways we're focused on empowerment.
Thank you. Mayor Lumumba.
I will attempt to be brief as well. First and foremost, let me express my great jealousy that my good friend Randall has a land bank, because we've been pushing for that legislation in our state house for several years. And we find that in many communities it is advantageous so that the community has say so, while we try to protect against criminalizing poverty. Just as he said, we do everything to guard against gentrification, because we see gentrification as a war against people, moving people from one state of misery to the next. But as we talk about ownership, I think we need to talk about economic opportunities. There are a few things that we do. First and foremost, we have been standing up a policy for a sheltered market within our city departments, where a certain portion of discretionary funds are carved out for disadvantaged businesses, and they can only work with other disadvantaged businesses as subcontractors. One of the issues that our businesses have suffered from is a lack of capital. We have been working with the Heron Foundation that has granted the city some resources so that we can deal with changing policy within the city. We have to understand, just as city design has been intentional and meant to exclude many people, that even the boards and commissions that are historic in our city are intended to do so. The electrical board or the plumbing board was often a instrument of exclusion to make certain that Black and brown communities could not participate on an equitable scale. We've been working with Hope Community Credit Union and Goldman Sachs, as they have given 7 cities, Birmingham being one, I believe, Randall, that are giving us access to capital to support Black businesses. And I think that it is important. Let me say this: it is important that we support Black institutions and Black businesses, and not be apologetic about that. I tell people, if 85% of your population is left-handed, then you need some left-handed jobs, right? But it also is important that we understand that a Black business is like any other business in a capitalist society, meaning that it works to exploit its market. And after a market has become, profitable, after it has maximized that opportunity in that market, then it may potentially get up and leave to a new market and leave the very community that gave life to it. And so we need businesses within our city that part of its mission is the service of the community. And that is why we lift up the notion of cooperative business as well, worker-owned cooperative, so people can not only establish how they'll labor, but they have some say-so in what the fruits of their labor will be as well.
That's a very important reminder of a saying that my good friend and colleague, Andre Perry of the Brookings Institution, frequently says, which is there's nothing wrong with Black people, and I'm going to add Black businesses, Black capital, Black communities, that racism won't solve. And part of what you're pointing to in that comment is also about the narratives we put around Black people, businesses, and communities that cause us to have to make statements about the left-handed population and the left-handed workers. So thank you all for giving, I think, a really well-rounded set of examples around the different approaches to deepening equity in our communities and deepening ownership in our communities. We're now going to hear from Michael Murphy, who is the principal and founder of Mass Design Group. We've invited Michael in to listen to this conversation. He is a practicing architect, writer, educator. He's done work in Birmingham, and he's currently working in what he calls fringe cities. Asking him to offer us some reflections on what he heard and perhaps share a little bit of insight of how he's worked on some of these issues. Mayors, we're going to ask you to hang out and listen to these closing remarks from Michael for about 10, 15 minutes or so. And then we're going to come back. Thank you all. And then end with our closing panel from Bryan C. Lee. So Michael, please take it away. Oh, and one last thing. If we maybe can put up our Just City Values poll once more for any of our audience members who joined during this panel and weren't in the first panel, we can collect some more feedback on the 3 values that you think are most important to achieving justice in your city. We can launch that. If you respond to it, it will then go away and you will have Michael full screen. But Michael, thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you, Toni. Thank you all. I'm really honored to be here among such inspiring civic leaders. I want to thank you for the invitation for the Mayor's Institute. Thank you, Mayor Patterson-Howard, Woodfin, and Lumumba for that really inspiring set of talking points and ideas. We really all learn from your leadership, and we are reminded that design decisions are not neutral ones. I don't know if I can have my slides up. Thank you. I think this is a really important point, especially hearing from Mayor Lumumba, that there is no neutrality in the built world. And by that we mean that design decisions have the power to hurt and also the power to heal. And in our current COVID purgatory, that crisis has really never been more apparent to all of us, that the buildings around us that we're sitting in and zooming in to you today, they impact our health every day. They literally are keeping us from access to clean and breathable air. They can literally save our lives if they are designed to allow us to breathe better. But in the stories of these mayors, we also see hope that new infrastructure is needed to serve their communities, to right and heal from historic injustices, to decontaminate from environmental pollution, and to reconfigure the priorities of justice in place. This is what the well-designed built world ultimately could do. But too often, very few have access to these services. They lack the resources to commit to them, to commit to being proximate in places and to listen. And like so many places, these dialogues are stuck in a scarcity mindset of low expectations, that one investment is someone else's disinvestment. I know this also very personally, for I grew up in one of these post-industrial cities whose glory seemed to be in the rear view. Poughkeepsie, New York, up the river from Mount Vernon, was once a thriving commercial and industrial center of the Hudson Valley in New York State, an incredibly diverse city of educational institutions and industries, which shrank by almost 50% in the mid-century. The city saw enormous investments in urban renewal in the 1960s, huge plans that led ultimately to further despair, and has for decades waited for that market to emerge, that thing that seems just out of reach at every market cycle. More personally, growing up, I was told that Poughkeepsie didn't matter, that the city I was from was worthless, and that to do anything, one had to leave. It didn't matter very much to anyone, and it certainly shouldn't matter to me. But of course, as the mayors mentioned, it did matter. It did matter to me. I can't imagine anything else mattered as much to me as where my home was, where I was brought up, and where my worldview emerged from. Our homes are a rich and complicated armature through which we understand ourselves. How instructive to be reminded daily that it matters little to anyone. When I asked why this was, I was told often that Poughkeepsie's decline was the fault of designers, architects, and planners who dreamed up big programs to revitalize the urban core in the mid-century. They took the new urban renewal funding of the Great Society programs and they demolished neighborhoods, built massive arterial highways through red-lined neighborhoods. They divided the north and south between rich and poor, much like Mount Vernon, and planted a sea of parking where people used to live with historic structures. I was told they used their design power as a weapon to reinforce oppressive hierarchies of race, ethnicity, and poverty. And I wanted to know why this was, and also how it happened. And probably my journey as a designer and architect began with this very question, wrestling with this incredible power that designers seem to have and their complicity in the design decisions that affect so many people's lives. How could these decisions have so much inequitable impact for so many generations with so little accountability? But as I dug into this history, I also found new insights that I hadn't been told. Poughkeepsie got some of the most funding in the nation in the urban renewal period. It was led at that time by a progressive, anti-poverty, anti-racist administration. It received model city designation. It unlocked even more money per capita than most cities nationally. And it had plans, progressive plans of affordable housing and lifting people out of poverty. And surprisingly to me, its projects were embraced by both the conservative right and the progressive left, which gave me pause because it had been such a dynamic failure. In many of these places, these political alliances came together to capture these federal grants, to make big changes in infrastructure, and yet have so many unintended generational consequences, and some of them many intended. And I just think about this now, if we are about to face really the next great federal investment in infrastructure, we're going to dust off plans, not from the 60s, but new plans across cities in the United States, and maybe potentially get money into these small American cities. How will we not repeat the same mistakes that happened in the past? So as an organization, my organization, Mass Design Group, we wanted to learn how these mistakes were not unique to Poughkeepsie, but represented a typology of city planning narratives around our country. And our Fringe Cities Design Lab was born through this research where we identified about 100 other cities, mostly in older post-industrial towns and regions like Poughkeepsie, but throughout the United States. And they gave us a lens through which we could read the role of design and planning in shaping place, reinforcing power, and sometimes even fighting for, as Mayor Lumumba mentioned, self-determined communities that inspire planning to happen collectively. While these small cities deserve investigation as they have been largely ignored, they also contain lessons for many fringe adjacent cities beyond the small set of 100 I mentioned. Many mid-sized cities like Birmingham and Jackson and Mount Vernon and Montgomery, Alabama, are aggregates of smaller urban communities whose unique narratives of structural injustice are related to the fringe. And so for this, the fringe really has two meanings for us. First, it suggests a familiar narrative of the fraying building urban fabric, that of disinvestment, of vacancy, of block erasures, of food deserts, of unjust property management, of racist redlining practices weaponized against Black and brown communities. But the fringe also suggests the creative thinking that's on the edge. Fringe movements made up of local community activists, shared ownership models of land, property, and business opportunity, and those using limited resources to create resourceful, creative, progressive plans to fight for more spatial and environmental justice. We set up this office in a pop-up storefront as a nonprofit in Poughkeepsie. We call it the Hudson Valley Design Lab, and we set it up there to incubate these collective planning practices that Mayor Lumumba talked about, to exhibit those ideas that we heard from folks, and to encourage conversations to be made collectively. The ideas about community needs were present and latent, of course, but often those ideas need space to breathe. They needed design services to visualize them. They needed to inspire policy shifts, and they needed to be shown to raise new types of money and grants and encourage more dialogue and collaboration. Since launching the Hudson Valley Design Lab in 2017, we've hosted dozens of community conversations. We've built a team of dedicated activists and designers on the ground, and we begin to build momentum behind major, what I couldn't have foreseen, but major infrastructure projects, such as a new community center and YMCA, push for a land bank like in Birmingham. We've been dying for one as well. Building affordable housing throughout the city, a new green infrastructure corridor in an abandoned creek that cut through the center of the city, and most importantly, mobilizing research and action to right historic wrongs from urban renewal, such as the vicious arterial highway which divided the city between north and south. That highway is now under review in hopes to stitch the city's fabric back together. And we've encountered a different reality and work on the ground in Poughkeepsie. That design is not a luxury. Design is a right. And that is a problem of, it is a right, and it is a problem of access to design that is the injustice. We also need to think critically about infrastructure that might address long-held structural problems, like Mayor Woodfin talks about in Birmingham and in the food deserts of Ensley. In this case, the access to local and healthy food, the inequity of services, and the values of connecting our bodies to the regions we live in, this is also a spatial problem, and we need infrastructure to solve for that. In Birmingham, we've seen this firsthand, and we're working on a new bustling market for a resilient regional food economy that supports producers and eaters. While a different part of town from Ensley, the goal is still to address the challenges of a food desert through improving the distribution of services and access to health through local networks. We hope and expect the Pepper Place Pavilion to valorize and concretize a 20-year grassroots market movement to become a permanent one. And this collection of farmers and growers has led to one of the most vibrant and revered food cultures in the U.S. But mostly we've learned that investing in place matters from our work in Montgomery, Alabama, south of Birmingham, where the National Memorial for Peace and Justice, which was designed and built in 2018, has led to a vast transformative cultural and economic impact on this city and this region. Bryan Stevenson and his amazing group, the Equal Justice Initiative, have done such powerful and transformative work in changing the narrative of memorialization and restorative justice in our nation. They've really created and established a new North Star for how all cities might imagine the landscapes of culture, of commemoration, and the celebration of voices that have long been buried and hidden through their own built fabric. But it was in building this place, a place of pilgrimage, a place of restorative action, that transferred these ideas into physical changes. It humbles and empowers those who visit it. And since it opened, almost 750,000 people have visited, and over $1 billion in new revenue in the state have come from tourism, of people wanting to bear witness and set foot in a place that wrestles with our nation's darkest history in order to remain hopeful for its future. We certainly could not have predicted this response, but in our minds, it is the highest calling that design and architecture can aspire to produce, and that is in the construction of dignity. So I do want to thank Mayor Lumumba for expanding my vocabulary around what it would mean to create an economy centered on dignity, one that invests in its people, in the places that they live, in infrastructures that daily remind them that they as human beings still matter. Dignity, that is truly the fundamental and essential calling of design. It is, and it is a right we can no longer afford to not provide access to. Thank you, mayors and Toni and the Mayor's Institute for showing us ways to reinforce these lessons and practice anew. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Michael, for those really on-point reflections and the way in which I had the instinct that your work would dovetail really nicely with what these three mayors were talking about, and you proved that to be absolutely true. So thank you so much for that. And it reminds me of what Rod Joy, the Chief of Staff to the Director of the NEA, opened this symposium up with, in that he called the mayors the chief planners and urban designers of cities, and really situated you all in the real seat of authority. And what this hopefully fellowship does is only help you to appreciate the power you have to shape environments. You shape the way we all as designers approach the work with you. You set that agenda, and the way in which you all set the tone in your cities for that to be a collaborative process with your constituents makes that work, I think, more impactful and resonate in the ways that some of the examples we've heard today, but also the examples that we heard from all of our resource team members over the course of the 11 weeks. Before we close out with our final speaker, Bryan C. Lee, I'd like to offer each of the mayors maybe one last comment by asking one question, which is if you could maybe describe one thing you learned from someone else. And I think actually Mayor Howard actually spoke about that, but it doesn't have to be anyone on your panel, because you've all spoken about the value of being in a cohort and having a network to rely on. And many of you are situated in a number of leadership spaces. But through this design cabal that we put together, is there something about planning and design that you felt like you learned that you didn't before you started, or something you've learned from a resource person or a mayor that you'll be taking away? So you each get your 30-second response to that question. Mayor Patterson-Howard, why don't we start with you?
Sure. So again, I think it's just about being intentional and unapologetic about lifting our voice and speaking about the traditional inequities that have existed. And the only way that you can reverse inequity is by pushing equity. And so we can't apologize and we can't worry about what all of the different constituencies might say. We have to push forward because this was done and now we have to rectify it, we have to fix it, and we have to transform our communities.
Thank you. Mayor Woodfin.
Words matter. This program, this fellowship, I've learned a lot, but what jumps out is that words matter. We're talking about place. We're talking about being intentional around design and the combination of disinvestments and not having equity in certain areas that are for the Black community. Words matter. And so having a frame around what you're trying to do and then repeating that over and over until the citizens buy in who live in that area or who you want to frequent that area. Your words matter, how often you use them, where you use them. And so that's what I learned.
Thank you. And Mayor Lumumba.
I think that this experience, first and foremost, I've learned a lot. I'm constantly learning from my other mayors, some of the presenters that we've had. I think it's very easy to see, issues of justice and equity in our policies around policing. It's very easy to see justice and equity concerns around what we fund. This process has really illuminated for me the importance of justice and equity discussions in planning, not only looking forward, but understanding, looking backwards, the disparate effect that it's had on our communities. And so it has really been enlightening to learn that, and I appreciate that.
Well, Michael Murphy, thank you so much for taking the time to join us. And supreme thank you to the Honorable Mayor Shawyn Howard, Randall Woodfin, and Chokwe Lumumba. It's been a pleasure to work with you over this last semester. Thank you again for taking the time to come and discuss your work with us publicly. Blessings to all of you all and your good hard work. And thank you again for joining us this afternoon. I think you're seeing on the screen where our Just City values results are. Fairness is still leading the way, followed by engagement and acceptance. This really helps us at the Just City Lab. We collect this type of input at all of the public events that we hold around the world, actually. We've done this in South Africa, Rotterdam, Amsterdam, different cities in the United States, really trying to, one, see where our common and shared values are globally, but also see where different cities have very distinct and different and nuanced sets of values, which is proving to us that justice does not look the same everywhere for everyone. So thank you all for participating in this panel. We now like to close out our afternoon with Bryan C. Lee, who is an architect, educator, writer, and design justice advocate. He is the founder and design director of Co-Locate Design, a nonprofit interdisciplinary design practice in New Orleans dedicated to expanding community access to design and creating space of racial, social, and cultural equity. Bryan is also the co-organizer of Designers Protest, a collaborative which also launched in this time of COVID and has been a really important space for advocating for justice and pulling together the design community and situating us in spaces like this with policymakers. It continues to promote the work of inclusive equity and justice practice in design. Bryan, thank you for joining us this afternoon, and we appreciate your remarks in closing us out.
Thank you. Thank you. Thank you, mayors, for taking the time to be a part of this program and to engage it in your fullest. Thank you, Toni, for the invitation. It's been great to hear the speakers and to hear everyone kind of speak about design through the lens of justice in such an eloquent way. As an organizer myself, as an architect, I view a lot of this work as essential to the outputs that we want to see in our cities and for our communities. And so as we talk through these final remarks, there's so many things that resonated with me through this work that I want to kind of just bring up a few while we bring up the slides, just to kind of talk through this. So our work centers on a few things, and what you heard through a lot of the conversation today were very simple. If we think about power, the values we hold, and how we have collective care, power speaks to the fact that the history of all revolutions was built on land. It's the landlord versus the landless. And so when we think about those histories, it's a pursuit of justice through the built environment, regardless of the barriers in front of us. The values we have, our collective values, are validated through the spaces and places we design. And so our ability to recognize those values as inherent to the built environment is critical in this work. And then lastly, care. Cribbing from Dr. Cornel West, thinking about justice is what love looks like in public. We talk about design justice as what love looks like in public spaces. It is a deep, unabiding care for a beloved community. It requires us to consider not just doing things for a community, but being of a community, being in a community moving forward. So that really means, when we sum that up, we're talking about, for nearly every injustice we see in this world, there's an architecture, a plan, a design that sustains and maintains white supremacy, that sustains, maintains that oppression within those spaces. And so design justice calls on us to ask and answer a few core questions. One is, can we forward a radical anti-racist vision for racial, social, and cultural reparation through the process and outcomes of design? Now, we say radical because we're asking ourselves to get to the root of a particular issue. This should not be a scary ask of us to get to the root, right? We say reparation because we're looking to heal. We're looking for these actions to heal a past of injustice. We say process and outcomes because it's not enough just to have a pretty building. It requires us to be, as so many have said today, connected and involved in communities, and community voice be the kind of centering of how we get to a design solution. Design justice then seeks for us to challenge privilege and power structures that use architecture and design, whether that is those on the ground asking our leaders to make actions felt and heard, or those of us in power who have the opportunity to shift narratives and to redistribute power in ways that serve a broader community. Now, when we talk about the largest things we deal with in this world, whether that is environmental racism, which finds its roots in we see this through the lens of climate change, or if it's housing or transportation or economic issues, they find their root in redlining and the remnants of covenants and the like around our cities. If we're talking about the prison industrial complex, it finds itself in the ever expanding nature of the police state and the facilities that support that action moving forward. And so for us, we ask to think about these demands as a critical way for us to think about a path forward. How do we end and abolish the carceral state? What does that mean on the other side? When we envision a just future, when we envision a just city, does that include those moments? I don't know that it does. I mean, we used to, so just as a sidebar, as I kind of launch into this, I used to work with a lot of young people, and we would always build these cities for a program we call Project Pipeline. And every time we would talk about the functional needs of the functional needs of a built environment or of a neighborhood, of a city, and almost never did you see police stations or the kind of surveillance state be a part of their envisioning of a just city. And so what does it mean for us to actively center new spaces? Then how do we think about design justice through a lens of self-determination, as we heard so eloquently a little bit earlier from Mayor Lumumba, talking about self-determination and the dignity economy, thinking about the fact that design moves at the speed of trust. It's required in this work. And then lastly, as we think about how we move forward, we have to recognize that there is a continuum of power that allows us to do this work effectively and for our communities. The recognition that there are signals and receivers that exist within this power structure that design can actively engage with. Whether that is the pedagogies, policies, procedures, on the other side of that, the practice, projects, and people that allow us to move our work forward. Now, as I used to work for the city for a small time, one of the things that became really critical is the definition or the kind of defining of policies versus procedures. See, they didn't call Black people out within redlining, right? They said undesirables. They called us undesirables, right? And so the procedures are the things that actually allow those policies to be implemented. And so our job as designers is to recognize the histories and legacies that define that use and abuse of power, the ways in which they are buried in our policies, and we just execute an outcome based on those procedures and policies. How do we actually circumvent that to see power as a redistributive force for the people? There is a long history, whether it's Black codes to segregated policies in the 19th century, whether it's the removal of cultural considerations in modernism in the early 20th century, Euclid versus Ambler, which helped to establish kind of police power through zoning processes. It's redlining, it's slum clearance, it's highways and transportation advancement across our cities. It is the divestment from HUD over time. All of these things are combinatorial. They are palimpsests that we have to and we are required to engage if we want to see change the way that we proclaim we do. So in that work, then we recognize that our saving grace is culture. Our saving grace is the kind of colloquialism by which we move these things forward. See, we always talk about culture as the consequence of persistent circumstance and immediate condition. It is a collective coping mechanism that allows us to move forward with an honoring of a past of traumas, a past of joys, but it allows us to protect one another moving forward. And so if our policies, our procedures, our actions as collectives start to center culture in the framing of our plans for our cities, then we are better off for that interaction. And then lastly, I'll close by saying we don't just seek equality in this mission. We're not just seeking equity in this mission. See, the point of this is to think about a just city. And the point of that is to move ourselves, to constantly press ourselves towards liberation. In order to understand justice and liberation, we have to understand injustice. We have to understand the fact that the denial of access to resources and assets in a particular city to maintain and hold power is consistent for those who have abused that power over time, right? And so we can choose as designers, as city officials, to stay with a status quo, to remain, to allow our policies to kind of continue to output injustice in the built environment. Or we can look to the other end of the spectrum and think about what justice actually calls on us to do, which is to acknowledge a past of injustice, to stabilize ourselves in the present, to remove barriers moving forward. And then if we want to just take it one step further and we want to seek freedom, we want to seek liberation through the work that we do, then we have to affirmatively influence the future outcomes of our work. You see, the story that we heard from the mayor of Birmingham a little bit earlier, we used to call those the Miss Marys, right? And these Miss Marys are the folks that know where the crack in 1968 happened in the street and can tell you every kid who fell over it in the subsequent 60 years. Those voices, the griots of our cities, are the ones that need to be acknowledged and invested in, as much as the investment into property, into land. Thinking about the ways that our cities, like New Orleans, had a highway cut through it. So much like Mount Vernon, we saw transportation cut through, and that divestment harm our economic wealth and health conditions of those spaces. And lastly, again, I think as we talk about what design justice really wants us to do moving forward, and the call for all of you as you seek to do this work is to recognize that if we are able to envision what just futures look like, then self-determination is going to end up being critical to those outcomes. Liberation is going to end up being critical to those outcomes. Redistribution of power, the value we add to our spaces, and again, the collective care we put into this work will be critical. Now, lastly, we say, again, to protest is to have an unyielding faith in the power and potential of a just society. It is fundamentally about our collective hope for a better society, a better city, a better neighborhood, a better block. So with that, I want to thank you for allowing me to be here and give you 10 minutes of this kind of final talk. And I hope that you take this information, that you join those who are organizing on the ground, whether they're activists, advocates, designers, architects, and move towards a more liberated, more just city. Thank you.
Oh, there I am. My computer froze for just a second. I was giving great praise and gratitude to Bryan. I heard a train kind of in the background or something after he started speaking, and I was saying it was a great metaphor for the movement building work that you're doing. So I thought it was a call for us to all get on the train of justice. As Bryan knows, and as those of you who know me know, that I have long been impatient with the pursuit of equity in our work, finding it insufficient to address the long-standing and systemic challenges of our time. I believe it is, while with good intentions, a passive approach. And so my whole idea for starting the Just City Lab was to challenge us to move into a more active position, and to dialogue, as we've done today and we've done through other platforms at the Just City Lab, to determine whether or not, if we move towards, as Bryan suggests, this proposition of justice and liberation, might we get to the end state sooner and more collectively, because it requires us all to move. Hence why I like the train sound in the background after your remarks. And so again, I have to say there's nothing wrong with Black people, Black spaces, Black businesses, Black communities that ending racism can't solve, and we all have to be a part of that work. I again want to thank all the mayors who joined us in the fellowship, the NEA, the Mayors Institute on City Design, the U.S. Conference of Mayors, and the GSD for allowing and inviting the Just City Lab here at the GSD to host this. Let me also thank my outstanding research assistants, Kyle Miller, Sarah Smith, and Cecily Hill, who participated in the development of the curriculum and execution of the curriculum in this program today. And let me also give a shout out to our designers who are part of the resource team. These are designers and policymakers, Karen Abrams and Grant Oliphant from the Hines Endowments, Dan Dioka, Stephen Gray, Lily Song, and Jim Stocker from the GSD, Ifoma Ibu from Creative Urban Alchemy, Andre Perry from the Brookings Institution, Deanna Van Buren, Designing Justice, Designing Spaces, and Ramona Westbrook of Brook Architecture. Thank you all so much for spending your afternoon with us. We're very appreciative of your time. We hope you learned a lot and have lessons that you can take back into your own community for creating a more just city. Visit us on designforthejustcity.org to grab the Just City Index and any of the work that we've created. It's all available for free downloads. We encourage you to use it, push it into your work, into your spaces, and have more conversations about the Just City. Thank you all, and good evening.